Rain poured from a yellow sky as the battlefield sizzled with plasma and smoke. The human outpost on Tarsis 5 had fallen silent. No signals, no answers. Only static replied to the command fleet's hails. When Corporal Mason and his unit arrived, all they found were broken walls, scorched machines, and silence that crawled under their skin. Mason was no hero. Just a combat medic trained to stop bleeding and drag soldiers to safety. He never thought he'd be the last man standing in a zone this cursed. But orders were clear: rescue any survivors, no matter the species. The jungle vines crept into the cracks of the station. Signs of struggle were everywhere. Blood red and violet stained the metal floor. A claw mark had ripped straight through a steel locker. Whatever attacked this place hadn't come to talk. Then he heard a whimper. Faint, from behind a fallen shelf. He raised his rifle, ready for anything. When he stepped around the rubble, he froze. She was there. An alien girl. Her skin glowed a soft green under the flickering lights. Silver white hair hung over her face. Her armor was cracked. Her arm was bent at a wrong angle. She was bleeding from the shoulder. And most shockingly, she didn't reach for a weapon. She looked up, trembling. Her eyes locked on Mason's, and for a second, something passed between them. Not fear, not hate, just pain. She was hurt, and she didn't care who he was. She needed help. Mason slowly lowered his rifle. Don't move, he said. He spoke in English, but used slow gestures. You're hurt. I'm not here to kill you. She blinked at him, confused, but didn't resist when he knelt beside her. Her arm was shattered, bones dislocated. Something had sliced her armor wide open. He pulled out his medical kit and unwrapped the bandages. She flinched as he touched her skin but didn't pull away. He worked in silence, ignoring the sounds outside. The jungle growls were getting closer. Easy, he muttered, tightening the wrap over her wound. You'll live, but you're gonna hate me for the next 5 minutes, she hissed as he injected the stabilizer. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't strike. She only stared at him, searching, trying to understand why he helped. Why? She whispered in her own language. Her translator crackled. Why save me? Mason just shrugged and whispered, because someone should. He didn't expect her to cling to him as the wall behind them exploded. Something big slammed through the corridor. A beast. 4 legs, metal plating, snarling with teeth of flame. Mason turned, shielding the alien girl with his body as fire. Licked across the ceiling. He fired his sidearm, hitting the thing's eye. It shrieked but didn't fall. The girl pushed against him, surprising him with her strength. Down, she growled. She raised her one good arm, activated a damaged gauntlet, and launched a glowing spear of light from her wrist. It struck the beast's throat. The monster crashed to the ground, twitching, then silent. They both sat there in heavy breaths, covered in dust and blood. Mason looked at her, still shielding her with one arm. Her body trembled. Not from fear but exhaustion. Her green fingers gripped his jacket, refusing to let go. She spoke again. I am Litari of the House Vakra. You saved me. I will remember this. Mason laughed quietly. It's Mason, I'm just a medic. Don't make a big deal out of it. She didn't reply. She only leaned her head against his chest and closed her eyes, trusting him. A sworn enemy. A human. He didn't understand it. Not then. Not when the evac team arrived hours later. Not when he carried her into the carry ship as she clung tightly to him like he was her only anchor. All he knew was, he'd only meant to bandage a wound. But somehow, that moment had stitched something far deeper. Something had started in the ruins of that outpost. And Mason had no idea it would follow him across galaxies. Not as a war story, but as something softer, stranger, and far more dangerous than bullets. It would begin with a single wrap of cloth, and end with a bond no treaty could break. Litari didn't speak during the flight back to the human command ship. She sat beside Mason, her arm wrapped tightly in the bandage he had tied earlier. Her silver hair was tangled with dirt and blood, but she held herself like a queen. The other soldiers stared. Some kept their weapons ready. She was, after all, a Vecra. Her kind had burned 3 colonies in the last war. But Mason didn't flinch. He sat between her and the others, not as her shield, but as her choice. When they landed, Command wasn't happy. A medic had brought back a wounded alien warrior without orders. But the ranking officer saw the look in Laitaria's eyes. She wasn't a prisoner. She was something else. Something they couldn't quite name. They gave her a medical chamber and locked the door with 2 guards outside. Mason stayed nearby, ignoring the whispers. He didn't know why he cared so much. Maybe it was the way she looked at him. Not like a soldier. Like a question. Later that night, she asked for him. The guards refused, but she spoke with calm authority. He wrapped my wound. He stays near. That is how it works on Vecra. The guards looked confused, but Mason heard the buzz of the core. Doran stepped inside. The room was quiet. Machines beeped softly. She sat on the edge of the medical bed, her arm now wrapped in a cleaner sling. She didn't rise when he entered. She only looked at him with tired eyes and asked, "Why did you touch me without fear?" "I'm a medic," Mason said, standing awkwardly. "If someone's hurt, I help. Doesn't matter if they're green or blue or human. That's all." She tilted her head, studying him as if his answer wasn't enough. "In my world," she said softly, "wrapping a wound is a sacred act. It means you claim responsibility for the life of the wounded. You take part of their pain, you share it." Mason blinked. "Well, I didn't mean all that. Just trying to stop you from bleeding to death." She nodded, but her gaze didn't soften. Intent matters little, the act speaks. She stood up then, and Mason instinctively stepped back. But she walked past him and stood at the window, looking out at the stars. "Do you hate my kind?" she asked without turning. Mason paused. "I don't know. I've seen what Vecra warriors can do. But hate? That's easy. Too easy. You weren't trying to kill me back there. So I don't hate you." Silence lingered for a moment. Then she whispered, "I was left behind. My own squad fled. I crawled for hours. Then you came." She turned, eyes hard but shining. "And you touched me like I was worth saving." Mason didn't know what to say. He wasn't trained for this. He had treated hundreds of wounded, but none had ever looked at him like that. None had spoken of pain like it was something to be shared. The next day, she refused to speak to anyone else. Command tried translators, officers, even diplomats. She kept silent until Mason arrived. Then, she spoke with calm ease. It became clear to everyone she had chosen him. She wasn't just recovering. She was bonding. Whatever cultural code she followed, Mason had stepped into it. Not with intention, but with action. And that action had weight. More than he realized. They moved her to a private cabin. Still guarded, still watched. But no longer treated like an enemy. Mason visited daily, sometimes with soup, sometimes with silence. But always with that quiet connection neither could explain. One evening, she held his hand longer than usual. "On Vecra," she said, "when you save someone and share their pain, it forms a thread. If the thread is strong, it becomes a bond. I think the thread has begun." Mason chuckled nervously. "I thought I just wrapped your arm." She smiled. "Faintly, you wrapped much more than that." Her fingers brushed the old bandage, now faded but still clinging to her skin like a promise. Rumors spread through the ship. Some laughed. Others warned Mason to be careful. But he didn't care. Every time he stepped into that room, he forgot about ranks and orders. All he saw was her, the girl with green skin, warrior blood, and eyes that now softened only for him. Mason sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the faded cloth in his hand. It was the same fabric he had used to wrap her arm on Tarsai's 5. He hadn't meant to keep it, but it had stayed with him, folded in his pack like a memory he didn't know he needed. Every time he visited her, Latari's smile grew a little warmer. Her voice steadied, her posture relaxed. She no longer sat like a soldier waiting for judgment. She sat like a person who had found something worth returning to. The crew had started calling her the Green Princess. Some used the term with awe, others with sarcasm. Mason didn't care. He only knew she waited for him every day. And that waiting felt like gravity pulling stronger each time. One afternoon, she asked him to bring her outside the ship quarters. "I want to walk," she said. "With you, I'm stronger now. You will protect me, yes?" Mason hesitated but nodded. "Always," he said, "even if the others stare." She wore a loose cloak over her armor, her arm still healing but free of the sling. As they walked down the corridor, heads turned. Some stopped talking altogether. 2 officers even stepped aside, uncertain whether to salute or scowl. Latari ignored them. Her focus stayed on Mason's steps. Every movement matched his. Every glance stayed calm. She trusted him to lead, even through a place where she didn't belong. They stopped at the observation deck, where stars spilled across black space like dust over velvet. She stood near the glass and whispered something in her native tongue. Mason didn't ask for a translation. He only watched her eyes reflect the stars. "I was raised to hate humans," she said quietly, "to believe your kind were beasts in suits. Clever but cruel. Cold but loud. That was the lesson since my birth." She turned to him slowly. "But you were the first to touch me with care." Mason swallowed hard. "And what were humans taught about the Vakra?" She smiled. "That we have no hearts. Only armor and fire. I suppose we're both wrong." She stepped closer. Her hand brushed his. He didn't move away. Her fingers curled around his knuckles. "This is the first time I've seen the stars without wanting to conquer them," she said. "I think it's because I'm not alone." Later that night, Mason lay awake in his room. Her words spun around his mind like a quiet storm. He didn't know what this was. It wasn't war. It wasn't peace either. It was something fragile, glowing, and still forming. Command called him in the next day. They had questions. Why was the Vecra girl bonding with him? Was it manipulation? Was it some alien custom to gain access to human systems? Mason sat still as the officer listed concerns. "She only speaks to you," the commander said. "That gives her leverage. You're emotionally compromised, Corporal." Mason stayed silent for a moment. Then he replied, "Maybe I am, but she's not a threat. She's healing." "From what?" The officer snapped. "An injury? Or from her nature?" Mason's voice didn't rise. "From both," he said. "We all are." He walked out without waiting for permission. He knew the next few days would be harder. Surveillance increased. Doors opened slower. Officers watched him. More than usual. But Latari still smiled when she saw him. "I heard the air around you grew colder," she said. "Is it because of me?" Mason shrugged. "They think you're changing me." She tilted her head. "Am I?" Mason met her eyes. "Yes, but not the way they fear." She stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest. Her voice lowered. "You changed me too. On Vecra, I was trained never to lean on anyone. But now, if I don't see you for one day, my chest aches." She paused. "Is this weakness?" Mason didn't answer. Instead, he took her hand and placed it gently over the same spot on his uniform where he carried her bandage. "If it is," he said, "then I'm weak too." That night, she didn't ask for him to leave early. They sat beside each other in silence, hands entwined. Her shoulder pressed gently against his. Neither spoke of war or duty or command. They just breathed the same air, and that was enough. Whatever had started in the ruins of that outpost had now become something living. Something not even command could label or control. And for the first time in his service, Mason wasn't afraid of the unknown. Mason stepped into Latari's room with a small container in his hands. It was soup again. She liked the way he seasoned it, even though she never said it aloud. He could tell by the way she always finished every drop. She was standing near the window, wrapped in a soft gray cloak that the medical team had finally allowed her. Her wounds had mostly healed now. Only a light scar rested near her collarbone, where metal had once torn her open. "You walk like a ghost," she said without turning. "Humans hide their steps. Vecra walk with thunder." Mason smiled and set the soup down on her desk. "Maybe that's why humans are better medics. We sneak in before death notices." She turned and raised an eyebrow. "That was clever." "Too clever for a soldier," he shrugged. "I'm not clever. I'm just tired." She didn't laugh, but she stepped closer. The air between them grew quiet. For a long moment, neither spoke. He noticed her fingers twitching by her side, like she wanted to reach out, but didn't yet know how. "I dreamed last night," she said softly. "We were on a field, no weapons, no ships, just you and me. I wore no armor, you carried no gun." Her voice dropped lower. "Is that even possible?" Mason didn't answer right away. He sat on the chair near her desk and looked at her carefully. "I don't know," he said, "but maybe we can try." They sat in silence for a while, just watching each other. The ship hummed faintly through the walls. It reminded them that the war still existed, just beyond their bubble of quiet moments. Outside, the human command was growing impatient. Rumors had spread beyond the ship. The Vecra Council had learned of Latari's survival. And worse, they had learned she was bonding with a human. A message came through the encrypted channel. The Vecra demanded her return, alive, untouched, unchanged. Mason read the translation and felt a weight sink into his chest. He walked straight to her quarters without knocking. She looked up, sensing his tension. "They want you back," he said. "Now," she nodded. "I knew they would. My family holds status. My life is not mine. It belongs to the bloodline." Mason clenched his fists. "They don't care if you're happy. They just want you on a throne or a battlefield." Latari stepped forward. "And what do you want, Mason?" He looked at her, unsure if he should speak the truth. But he did. "I want you safe. I want you free, and selfishly, I want you near me." Her eyes shimmered like glass struck by light. "Then I am torn," she whispered, "because I want all those things too." That night, Mason stayed longer than usual. They sat close together. Her hand rested over his, fingers locking. It wasn't a warrior's grip. It was something fragile and full of longing. The next morning, Mason received orders. He was to escort Latari to the transfer bay. A neutral ship would take her to the Vecra embassy for diplomatic return. Mason stared at the screen for a long time before deleting the message. He found her in the meditation room. Her hair flowed down her back, and her breathing was slow and deep. She looked like peace sculpted into motion. When she opened her eyes, she spoke before he did. "They sent the order, didn't they?" Mason nodded. "You don't have to go," he said. "We can fight it. File a protest. Tell them you're not ready." "I'm never ready," she replied. "But running solves nothing." He sat beside her on the floor. The silence between them stretched long. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "When I leave, will you forget me?" Mason turned his face toward her. "Not even if the stars go dark." She reached into her cloak and pulled something from a small pocket. It was a folded cloth, old and stained. He recognized it instantly, the bandage. The first one he ever wrapped around her arm. "You left it behind," she said. "But I could not." She placed it in his hand. "Now you carry it again, so I do not forget." Mason didn't speak. He only pressed the cloth to his chest and nodded. Latari stood slowly. Her face was calm, but her hands trembled. Then, "Walk me to the shuttle," she said, "one last time." He walked beside her down the metal corridors of the ship. Every soldier they passed went silent, not from hate. From confusion. They didn't know what they were seeing. A human and an alien, walking like something sacred had passed between them. At the boarding gate, she stopped and turned. "Will you wait for me?" she asked. Mason didn't blink. Forever. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, tight and sure. "Then this is not goodbye," she said. "This is a promise." And just like that, she was gone. The days after Litari's departure were quiet, too quiet. Mason returned to his duties, but the corridors felt colder. The med bay, once a place of urgency, now echoed with silence. He wrapped wounds, handed out rations, fixed bruised egos, but none of it felt like before. Each time he passed the room where she once stayed, he paused. The guards had been reassigned. The door stayed locked. Inside, dust settled on a bed that had once held something rare and alive. Mason kept her bandage, tucked safely in his pocket. It had become more than cloth. It was a weight that pressed over his heart. Not painful, but never light. A reminder of a connection the galaxy didn't understand. Letters came. Orders came. Missions passed. Weeks turned into a month. No word. From Litari, no message. No sign of her voice in the encrypted channels. Command refused to share anything beyond. She was received by her people. He didn't believe that was the end. Then one evening, the ship's alarms flared. Not red for attack. Blue for diplomatic arrival. Mason stood near the observation deck as a vessel shaped like a crescent moon approached the main hangar. The markings on its hull were unmistakable, Vecra royal insignia. Mason's heart pounded. He moved quickly through the corridors, ignoring protocol. Security tightened near the docking bay. 2 guards crossed their rifles as he approached. "Restricted access," one said firmly. "Who's arriving?" Mason demanded. "Answer me." The guards looked at each other. Then one replied, "Envoy from House Vikra. Princess Litari has returned. She requested to speak to one person only." Mason didn't wait for permission. He pushed past and entered the hangar. The Vecra vessel lowered its ramp in slow grace. From the smoke and light, she appeared light-airy. In royal silver robes, her hair glowing brighter than he remembered. But she wasn't alone. 2 armored Vecra warriors flanked her, their eyes cold, their hands near their weapons. Litari stepped forward, ignoring them. Her gaze locked on Mason and didn't waver. He stood still, heart racing. She walked slowly, each step deliberate. When she reached him, she lifted her hand and placed something in his palm. It was a thin metallic thread, soft as silk. "I left as one of theirs," she said quietly. "But I return as something else. What happened?" Mason whispered. "They didn't hurt you, did they?" "No," she said. "They gave me a choice. Obey tradition or follow what I had seen. I chose what I saw." The warriors behind her shifted uncomfortably. One hissed in their tongue. She turned sharply. "You will remain silent," she commanded. "I speak now." She faced Mason again. "I asked them to let me return. They allowed it only under one law." "What law?" he asked. "That I must not dishonor my house," she replied. "So I came not as a lover, but as a seeker," Mason blinked. "A seeker of what?" She stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Of what we began in the ruins, of what still lives in both of us." He reached for her hand and held it. "Then stay," he said. "Not as a princess, just as you." Her eyes softened. "Only if you accept what I offer." "What are you offering?" She leaned forward, forehead touching his. "A bond," she said. "As Vecra declare in sacred vow, one that no war can sever." Behind them, the warriors looked away. One tapped his communicator and spoke in a low tone. But no one interrupted. Mason Didn't speak, he simply nodded. Then he lifted the cloth bandage from his pocket and tied it gently around her wrist like a bracelet. She looked down at it, then up at him. "You kept it?" "I never took it off," he said. That night, she stayed aboard the human vessel. No orders stopped her. No guards followed her. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a message that two hearts could cross borders carved by centuries. That something simple as a wound could grow into something stronger than fear. They walked together under the artificial lights of the ship, her robe brushing against his uniform. No one stopped them. No one dared. And when she leaned into his side and whispered, "Now I wrap myself around you," he understood what that first day had truly started. It was not a rescue. It was a beginning. Latari's return changed everything. She was no longer seen as a wounded alien or a guest of war. She walked through the human vessel with quiet pride, not because she demanded respect, but because she carried her own peace with her. The crew didn't whisper as much now. Some saluted. Some nodded. But all of them watched with a strange mix of curiosity and understanding. The human who had once wrapped a wound now walked beside the alien who wore that memory like a jewel. Command called Mason in again. This time, it was not an interrogation. The senior officer, an old woman with cold eyes and a silver bar on her collar, spoke firmly, but without anger. "You've done something no diplomat could. We are watching this closely." "I didn't do it for diplomacy," Mason said. "I just didn't let her die." The officer leaned back in her chair. "And now she wants to stay. That means politics, and politics means risk." Mason remained calm, then let her speak for herself. And she did. Latari stood in front of the command board, surrounded by high-ranking officers. Her voice was clear. Her posture was steady. "I come not to divide, but to bridge. What began with blood now ends in bond." She told them the truth. That she had seen the cruelty of both sides. That hate was easy, but healing was rare. That one human's act of kindness had shaken her foundation more than any warship ever had. After the meeting, no one tried to send her back again. She was granted limited diplomatic presence. Allowed to stay, allowed to speak, allowed to walk beside Mason without anyone pulling them apart. It wasn't approval, but it was no longer resistance. They returned to their routine, though nothing was routine anymore. They ate together, trained together, sat by the viewing deck and watched the stars in silence. Sometimes she would rest her head on his shoulder. Sometimes he would take her hand without thinking. One evening, she brought him to the empty meditation chamber. The lights were dim, the walls hummed quietly. She stood barefoot on the smooth floor, her eyes closed. "This is where Vaker warriors remember who they were before they were soldiers," she said. Mason stood beside her. "And who were you?" "I was a girl who liked the sound of rivers," she replied. "Who believed stars were songs waiting to be sung." She opened her eyes and faced him. "What about you, Mason? Who were you before the war?" He thought for a moment. "Just a guy who patched wounds and hoped no one bled out before I finished." She stepped closer. "You still are that. But now you patch more than wounds." She placed something small in his hand. It was a smooth crystal, shaped like a teardrop. "In my culture, this is given during courtship. A symbol of trust, of invitation." He held it carefully. "Are you inviting me?" She nodded once. "Not to my world. To my heart." He didn't hesitate. "Then I accept." The bond became official within days. Not in a legal sense, but in a way that mattered more. Her people knew. His people saw. And yet, no one tried to break it. Soon, she moved into a chamber near his. Not out of need, but out of choice. The crew accepted it. Some smiled. Some still struggled. But no one questioned it out loud anymore. One night, as Mason lay beside her, She traced a finger over the scar near her shoulder. "You saved this arm," she whispered. "But I gave you the rest willingly." Mason looked into her eyes, and I never stopped holding it. Outside their room, the galaxy still burned in places. Conflict still raged. But within that ship, on that deck, peace had found a place to sit. The war hadn't ended. But something else had begun. Something stronger than war. It began not with power, not with conquest, but with a medic's bandage and a wounded girl who chose to trust. That night, she wrapped her arms around him and fell asleep in silence. Not out of fear, not out of duty, but because she wanted to, and Mason finally understood what it meant to be claimed not by force, but by love. The ship drifted in orbit over a neutral planet where peace talks were set to begin. It was meant to be a simple ceasefire meeting, temporary, fragile, but for the first time in decades, both Vikra and human delegates had agreed to sit at the same table. Mason had no place among ambassadors, but Litari insisted he attend. "If it weren't for you," she said, "I would never have seen this day. Your presence is not a favor. It is part of the truth." He stood at the edge of the council chamber, uniform neat, boots polished. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The Vecra leaders glanced at him with wary eyes, and then at Litari, who walked to the center with pride in every step. She wore ceremonial Vecra robes, colored silver and green, symbols of peace etched into the fabric. But she also wore one thing not part of the royal dress code, a cloth bandage tied around her wrist like a bracelet. It was faded now. But every leader in that room noticed it. Litari raised her voice. "I speak not for conquest, not for vengeance. I speak as someone who was wounded, then healed by a hand once called enemy. I speak for a new choice." The hall remained silent. No one interrupted her. She turned toward the human side. Mason met her gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her eyes carried everything. One of the older Vecra elders stood. His voice trembled slightly. "You would risk your name, your bloodline, for a human?" Litari replied without hesitation. "No, I would risk it for the truth." There was no applause, only silence. And yet, something shifted in that stillness. No one walked out. No one raised a weapon. The talks continued into the night. Documents were signed. Agreements formed. Small steps, but real ones. Afterward, Mason found her waiting alone beneath a silver tree near the embassy. The leaves shimmered in the moonlight, casting a glow across her hair. "You were brave," he said. "No," she replied. "I was honest." They sat together on a bench made of polished stone. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let out a long breath. He didn't realize he had been holding. "So what happens now?" he asked. "I remain a daughter of Vecra," she said, "but I will also be yours." Mason turned his face toward her. "And I remain a soldier of Earth, but I'll never serve anyone above you." She chuckled softly. "Then we are both traitors. Or perhaps just believers in something stronger." Later, back aboard the ship, the crew gathered for an unexpected announcement. Mason was called to the central deck. He arrived confused, thinking it was some mistake, but when he entered, he saw her standing there. Litari, with something in her hands. It was a cloth banner, stitched with both Vecra and human symbols. Unity, honor, healing. She raised it and stepped forward. "In both our cultures," she said, "there's no greater truth than to protect what one loves. Mason did that for me. Today I return it." She wrapped the banner gently over his shoulders like a cloak. The crew watched in silence, some in awe, some unsure. But no one mocked, no one laughed. She spoke one final sentence. "This is not tradition. This is a new beginning." That night, they shared a quiet meal in the corner of the dining hall. Just the two of them. No guards, no orders. Just real food and soft conversation. He asked her about stars she had seen. She asked him about rivers on Earth. Neither of them noticed how long they sat there. They didn't need to. Time had started, measuring itself differently around them. Before sleep, she traced a fingertip over his jaw and said, "Your touch once saved me. But now I stay wrapped around you not because I'm broken, but because I choose to be whole with you." He kissed her knuckles gently and whispered, "I never knew saving one life would lead to finding my own." And so the soldier and the alien, the medic and the warrior, remained by each other's side, not as hero and rescued, but as two souls who dared to build something greater than survival. They began with a single gesture, a wrapped wound, and from that grew a bond neither side of the galaxy could deny. The months that followed brought change across the galaxy. The war didn't end overnight, but its flame dimmed. The talks between humans and Vikra turned into trade agreements, then into cultural exchanges. Then, the first whispers of peace treaties began. But for Mason and Latari, peace had already arrived. They no longer walked through the ship with eyes watching every step. Now when they passed, others nodded in greeting, even smiled. What was once strange had become something others learned to respect. Mason returned to medical duties. Soldiers still got injured. Accidents still happened. But every time he treated someone, he felt more grounded, more alive. Because he knew the value of even one life saved, and Latari found her own place. She wasn't just a visitor anymore. She started helping with translation programs, counseling, conflict mediation. The crew called her the Bridge with quiet affection. Some still didn't understand them. Some still whispered. But the ones who mattered had stopped asking why they were together. They now asked how they had stayed so strong. It was one evening during the quiet watch when Mason stood on the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Latari joined him in silence, placing her hand on his chest. Her palm rested over the old bandage he still carried. "You still keep it?" she asked softly. "I do," he said, "because it reminds me what one small act can become." She looked up at him. "You never asked what I dreamed as a child." Mason smiled. "Tell me." "I used to dream," she began, "of being free, of standing on foreign soil not as a conqueror, but as someone welcomed." She placed her other hand over his. "I thought it was foolish. That dreams like that only ended in chains." "But you weren't chained," Mason said. "You were chosen." She nodded. "And I chose you." Later that week, the ship made its way to a neutral planet where both species were hosting a festival. It was the first open event shared by Vikra and humans. Music echoed across the valley. Fires danced. Voices blended in languages once used for threats. Mason stood among officers and envoys. His uniform was clean, and for once, he wasn't carrying medical gear. Latari appeared beside him wearing a ceremonial robe crafted by both cultures. Half green, half blue, one pattern, one story. She stepped forward and took his hand in front of the crowd. Her voice was calm and certain. "There is no need for long speeches. This is not a union of power. It is a bond born from mercy." She placed something in his hand again. Not a weapon, not a jewel, but a ribbon made from the cloth of her first bandage. Cleaned, folded, preserved. "This time," she said, "I wrap you." She gently tied the ribbon around his wrist. The crowd grew silent. Then, slowly, it began to applaud. First the humans, then the Vikra. A sound that rose from two histories full of pain and became something full of hope. Later that night, they returned to their quarters. The lights were low. The stars above the valley shimmered through the glass. Latari rested, her head on Mason's chest, and whispered, "Do you know what this means on Vikra?" "What?" She smiled. "When one wraps another with sacred cloth, it means they are bound, not by law, not by duty, but by soul." Mason looked down at her, brushing a strand of her silver hair behind her ear. Then I guess we're bound. Forever. She lifted her face. And if I wrap myself around you every night, what does that mean? That I never want to sleep without you. She laughed quietly and curled against him tighter. No walls between them. No fear of tomorrow. Just the quiet hum of something new that belonged only to them, and somewhere deep in space, in a galaxy that once divided them, peace flickered for the first time in generations, not because of leaders or treaties, but because one human chose to care, and one alien chose to trust. Their story wasn't marked by battles. It was marked by the healing that followed. A bandage tied in a ruined outpost had become a bond that would never break, and every night after, as she wrapped herself around him once more, Mason smiled and whispered the same words he had spoken from the very beginning. "You're safe now, I've got you." And she always answered the same way, "So do I."